The last time I saw Catalina, we were sitting on the rooftop of a building in El Poblado, one of those places with the little plunge pool nobody actually swims in, and she was crying. Not because we were ending, we'd both known that was coming for weeks. She was crying because I'd finally said out loud the number. 7 months, roughly $14,000, and I said it flatly, no anger, almost curious about my own stupidity, and she looked at me like I'd broken some agreement we'd never spoken, but both understood. And in that moment, I realized I had learned more about Medellín, about this city, and the way men move through it, in those 7 expensive months, than I had in the 2 years before them. I'm Luke. I've spent the last 7 years moving between cities in Latin America, and Medellín is the one I keep coming back to. 18 months there now, spread across a bunch of stays. By the end of this video, you're going to understand what it actually means to date in this city as a foreign man. Not the fantasy version, not the horror story version either, the real one, with all the parts that don't fit on a thumbnail. If you're considering doing something similar, or you just want to know what it's actually like, please subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There's a new city every few months on this channel, and I try to tell the truth about all of them. So let me start where I actually started, which was not with wisdom. The first time I flew into Medellín, I was already a couple years into this whole thing. I'd done Mexico City, I'd done a stint in Cartagena, I thought I understood the region. That was my first mistake. Thinking Latin America is one thing, it isn't. Medellín is its own animal, and the people from there, the Paisas, are proud of that in a way that took me a long time to properly respect. Paisa is what people from Medellín and the surrounding Antioquia region call themselves, and it's not a small distinction to them. It's an identity, a way of carrying yourself, a whole set of values around family and appearance and hustle and warmth. I'll come back to that, because it matters more to the dating question than almost anything else. I landed and I did what half the foreign men who come here do. I got an Airbnb in El Poblado, up in the hills where the streets are steep and green and every third building is new. I paid about $1,400 a month for a 1-bedroom with a view, which is expensive for the city and cheap for the view, and I told myself I'd move somewhere more local later. I didn't, not that first stay. El Poblado is a bubble, and the thing about a bubble is it's comfortable, and comfort is the enemy of actually understanding a place. Here's the first thing worth knowing, and I wish someone had told me flat out. In El Poblado, especially in the nightlife strip around Provenza and Parque Lleras, you are not experiencing Medellín. You are experiencing a zone that has organized itself around foreign men with dollars. The bars, the rooftop clubs, a big chunk of the dating dynamic in those few blocks, a lot of it is a marketplace, and you are the demand side, and you should know that going in. That's not a moral judgment. Marketplaces are honest in their own way. But men come here and mistake the marketplace for the culture, and they build an entire understanding of Paisa women out of interactions that only happen because they're a foreigner, standing in the one part of town, engineered for exactly that. It'd be like flying to Las Vegas and forming your theory of American women on the casino floor. The energy in that first week was intoxicating, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. Warm, direct, a lot of eye contact, a lot of ease. But by week 2, something started to itch at me, and it took Catalina, who I hadn't met yet, to make me understand what it was. Let me tell you how I met her, because it wasn't in Fileras. That's the irony. I met Catalina at a coffee thing in Manila, which is this smaller, calmer neighborhood right next to Poblado. More locals, better coffee, fewer men who look like me. She worked adjacent to the design world. She was sharp. She had a laugh that made you feel like you'd earned it. And crucially, she did not seem impressed by me at all, which after 2 weeks of the marketplace felt like oxygen. I thought, this is the real one. This is the woman outside the machine. And she was, in a sense. Catalina was real, she was smart, and she genuinely liked me. That's the part people get wrong about these cautionary stories. The trap isn't usually a con artist who never cared. The trap is more human and more expensive than that. What happened over the next 7 months was a slow, almost invisible restructuring of who paid for what. It never happened in a single conversation. It was gradual. Dinners, obviously. Then dinners for her friends. Then a problem with her sister that a few $100s solved. Then her phone. Then a course she wanted to take that would change her career, and how could I be the guy who stood between her and her future for $800? Then rent. Once, then twice. Then the second time never mentioned again as a loan. And the thing I need you to understand is that at each individual step, I said yes because I wanted to, because I could afford it, because it felt good to be generous with someone I cared about. No single payment was crazy. It's only when you stack them up on a rooftop at the end that the number makes you sit down. Here's the insight I'd give my younger self, and it applies whether you go to Medellín or anywhere else in this region. In a place where the income gap between you and the person across the table is enormous, and in Medellín, on a U.S. remote income, it is enormous. Generosity and exploitation live on the same street, and the street has no signs. A local woman dating a local man operates inside a set of economic expectations you're completely outside of. When you enter, your money distorts everything, including her, including you, and often including feelings that are otherwise completely real. Catalina was not a villain. I was not a victim. I was a grown man who confused the ability to pay for something with the wisdom of paying for it, over and over, for 7 months. Now the deeper dynamic, the thing that took me the full 18 months to actually see clearly. Paisa culture puts an enormous premium on appearance, presentation, and provision. Men in Medellín are, broadly, expected to court seriously, to pursue, to provide, to demonstrate stability. And the women grow up inside that expectation from both directions. They present beautifully because the culture rewards it, and they read a man's provision as a signal of his seriousness because that's the language the culture speaks. None of this is unique to Colombia, but it's turned up loud in Medellín specifically, and here's why that matters to you as a foreigner. When you show up with dollars and generosity, you are not being unusually charming. You are, in the local grammar, sending an extremely loud signal of serious long-term intent. You think you're being a nice guy on a few dates. She may be reading it as, "This man is courting me for real." That gap in interpretation is where an enormous amount of the pain in these cross-cultural relationships gets manufactured, in both directions. I watched this happen to a friend of mine, another American, who genuinely could not understand why a woman he'd been casually seeing for a month was talking about meeting her family. From his frame, they'd been on 5 dates. From her frame, this attentive foreign man had been signaling commitment loudly the whole time. Neither of them was lying. They were speaking 2 different languages using the same words, and no one had handed either of them a dictionary. I want to know, how many of you watching this are seriously thinking about doing something similar? Drop the city you're thinking about in the comments. I read all of them. And be specific, because Colombia and Medellín and some beach town where nobody speaks English are 3 completely different lives. So let's talk about what men get wrong, because after 18 months and a lot of watching, I've got a clear picture. The first mistake is the one I already confessed, confusing your money with your merit. A version of every foreign man who comes here goes through a phase where the ease of it all convinces him he's suddenly become vastly more attractive than he was back home. He wasn't. The market changed, not him. And the men who never figure that out are the ones who end up bitter 5 years in, blaming the women, when the actual problem is, they were doing arithmetic and calling it romance the entire time. The second mistake is treating Paisa women as a monolith, which, and I say this to myself as much as anyone, is exactly what a title like the one you might have clicked on to find this video invites you to do. There is no single Paisa woman. The university student in Laureles who wants nothing to do with the poblado scene and finds foreign men slightly embarrassing is a Paisa woman. The ambitious professional in Envigado who out-earns most of the men she dates is a Paisa woman. The woman in Provenza who has, very rationally, decided that dating foreigners is a better economic bet than dating locals is also a Paisa woman, and honestly, given the incentives, I understand her math completely. Lumping them together tells you nothing except that you haven't been here long enough to see the differences. The city has a class structure, a geography, an age spread, a whole spectrum of relationships to modernity, and all of that shapes who you're actually talking to far more than the fact that they're all from Antioquia. The third mistake, and this one's subtle, is thinking the language barrier is a minor inconvenience. It is not minor. It is the whole thing. I got by for months on bad Spanish and the English of women who'd learned it specifically to talk to men like me, and think about what that selection does. If the only women you can communicate with are the ones who learned English for the tourist economy, you have pre-filtered your entire dating pool down to the slice most oriented around foreigners, And then you turn around and conclude that's what the women here are like. It's a closed loop. The month my Spanish finally got good enough to have a real, fast, joking conversation was the month I started meeting entirely different women, and my whole picture of the city changed. That, more than anything, is my advice. Learn the language, not to be polite, but because it is the single thing that determines whether you experience the real place or the version built for men who never bother. And the fourth mistake is impatience. Men come for 2 weeks, or 2 months, and leave with a fully formed thesis about Paisa women. I had a fully formed thesis at 2 months too. It was wrong. I had a different, more confident, more wrong thesis at 6 months. The Catalina situation blew that one up. What I have now, at 18 months, is less a thesis than a respect for how much I still don't know. And that's the correct amount of confidence for a foreigner to have about a culture that isn't his. So what does it actually take? What's the shift? The core of it is this. You have to stop being a consumer and start being a participant. The consumer flies in, extracts experiences from the marketplace, and flies out with stories. The participant learns the language, gets out of poblado, builds actual friendships that aren't romantic or transactional. And this part is huge, because your read on the whole dating landscape gets sane the moment you have real friends here who tell you the truth. Andrea, a friend of mine from Mexico City, once told me the single most useful thing about all of this. You cannot understand the women of a place until you have friends there you would never sleep with. She's right. Every man I know who's happy long-term in Latin America has a network that isn't about dating. Every man I know who's miserable treats the entire country as Tinder, with better weather. Tactically, a few things I'd tell you plainly. Slow down on the money, and I mean from day one. Not out of stinginess, out of clarity. Let generosity be a thing you grow into as trust builds, not a thing you lead with, because when you lead with it, you never find out who'd have stayed without it. Watch how someone treats the waiter, the cleaner, the guy at the door. Class dynamics run deep in this city, and how a person navigates them tells you volumes. Pay attention to whether her life has room in it for you specifically, or a slot in it for a man like you generally. Those feel identical at first and could not be more different by month 3. And be honest, brutally honest with yourself about what you're actually looking for, because the number one source of pain I see is men who want something casual, signaling commitment without meaning to, and men who want commitment mistaking the ease of the marketplace for the presence of it. The kind of man who thrives here, from everything I've seen, is not the one with the most game or the most money. It's the one who's genuinely curious, a little humble, willing to be a beginner at the language and the culture, and secure enough that he doesn't need a whole country to reassure him that he's desirable. The city rewards that guy enormously. The other guy, the one who came to prove something to his ex back home, or to himself, the city gives him exactly enough to keep him hooked, and never quite enough to make him happy. I've been both guys. The second one is a worse life, even when it looks better in photos. Let me bring this home. 18 months in Medellín taught me that the question, what are Paisa women like in bed, or with your friends, or with your money, or with your heart, is the wrong question, and it's wrong in a way that keeps you a tourist forever. Because it assumes there's an answer that's about them when almost everything that happens to a foreign man here is actually about him, his money, his intentions, his patience, his honesty, and how much of the real place he's willing to do the work to reach. The women aren't a monolith, and they aren't a mystery. They're people in a specific and beautiful and complicated city, living inside expectations you're standing outside of. And the entire game is learning to see clearly enough that you stop mistaking your own distortions for their nature. Catalina cost me $14,000, and I'd argue it was the best money I ever spent, because it burned down every lazy assumption I'd flown in with and made me actually learn the place. That's the truth bomb, if you want one. The fantasy is cheap and the reality is expensive, and the expensive one is the only one worth having. If you got something from this, hit subscribe. I'm in a different city every few months, and the next videos get into the neighborhoods nobody tells you about, the money mistakes that quietly wreck men out here, and what the long game actually looks like when the novelty wears off. See you on the road.